Can you give us more detail on some examples of the impact of emotional receptivity on both program content and ads?
Yeah, we found in the work that we did with A&E that where you have a relatively high match on emotional tonality between the ad and the show, and we tested 100 different ads across different categories for this exercise, and we matched them up against 33 different programs. But where you have a relatively high match, you will consistently see an uplift in ad receptivity scores across the usual kind of array of metrics, such as recall, unaided and aided recall, likability, relevance, willingness to recommend and claim purchase intent, and so on. So that's good. What was very interesting, though, is we define that as a kind of a perfect storm which occurs, which is where you have a higher match, but more importantly, it's where you find people really, really like a show. Because we ask people to rate the show on a 1 to 5 scale on every single show we include within Emotional DNA, which in the last wave is close to 1,100 shows in one survey. But if people rate a show a 5 relative to a 4 on that 5-point scale, you will see, on average, a 2x uplift over what people who rate the show as a 4 against all those measures of ad receptivity, which is very interesting indeed to my mind, because it suggests the value of programming that is very much liked by a larger proportion of its audience. It goes back to the old the engagement thing. One hesitates to use the word engagement. It's been used in so many different ways. But if you're talking about a simple evaluation of a program on that kind of scale, if you logically have 50% of the audience, for example, saying, oh, it's a 5, as opposed to 20% of the audience saying it's a 5, based on the research we did with A&E, it suggests that the airtime in that show, that 5 at 50%, is actually going to be worth more than the 5 at 20% of the audience. Now, we're going to be doing more research at Magid to revisit that issue. Now, obviously, one study doesn't prove a theory, doesn't prove a law, but we're going to be going back out and spending more of our own money, which is something Magid does quite a lot of. It actually spends its own money to make itself smarter. We're going to revisit that issue and see if it holds true again. Talking with people in the industry, our expectation is it absolutely will, because I know that directionally these findings are similar to those that have been unearthed with other pieces of research, often with totally different methods, investigating similar issues. So we hope to come out with something later this year, probably in the second quarter, where we've revisited that issue.
Have you been able to correlate emotional DNA to performance, whether sales or ratings?
We haven't yet carried it through to sales, although we're having some conversations with a few people right now to see how we might do that with access to different data. I think the exercise of doing that is entirely possible. I'm sure we will do it in the not too distant future. With regard to ratings, that is something that we have done. We were asked by a fairly eminent figure in the industry before thinking about buying into it. The question was, so what exactly is the correlation with ratings? Even though it wasn't something that was originally developed in that way, it was developed to inform programming. But the question came, so our analysts did the work, and although this was when we were at proof of concept stage, and it was a relatively small sample, it was only 1,500 looking at about 60 unscripted shows, the R squared against ratings performance came back at a 0.684. And we always said, look, if it comes back at a 0.0001, then the answer's no. It doesn't really correlate well with ratings, and there it is. But it came back that highly off of that kind of sample. Now we're going out and we're surveying 22,000 people at a time. Pretty confident, but if do that analysis again, it's going to be somewhere over 7. We've only just come out of the field on that survey. That analysis will be done. But more interestingly, what we're able to do is to break down by genre of programming which of the 8 different dimensions of emotional DNA that we've been able to statistically define are more or less likely to correlate with a strong ratings performance. We know in drama, for example, that the dimension that we call gravity if one has a great deal of gravity in a show, and these are shows like Walking Dead, Breaking Bad, and so on, that is more likely going to be indicative of a stronger ratings performance for a drama. It's not the only dimension that comes into play, and you can have other dimensions which go in completely the wrong direction, which can pull performance back. And that's the kind of thing that we pull out when we're looking at how we apply this to pilot testing, which is a matter of adding a very small number of discrete questions at the end of a fairly standard pilot testing process, which we do a lot of at Magid. And then we're able to conduct the analysis, not only to say which show that's currently on air in prime time is this new show most like in terms of its emotional DNA, which can help inform a marketing program, for example, on air. But we're also able to give a range of likely ratings performance based on the show as it currently is. And if we identify red flags, and it may be something like the overall pace, it may be lacking in adrenaline, we can say, well, okay, there are things that you can do about that. This is where the show doctoring side of the business comes in, and we can say, well, all you really need to do is to go back into the editing suite and you lay down a slightly different soundtrack, or you make the edits a little quicker, and it gives the sense of pace. Maybe it also comes back to how you're promoting the show. You want to carry that one through as well. And then you're able to say, fine, so if you could actually move that this far along the needle, then potentially you're looking at a different range for your ratings performance.
Give me more detail about the different types of emotional DNA and how you discovered them.
Sure. As I mentioned, the last wave of emotional DNA, which is currently being analysed, was fielded among 22,000 American TV viewers aged 12 to 64, census matched. And every show that's included achieves a 0.2 1849 coverage rating. That's our threshold, and that's where we end up with, I think it was 1,079 shows in this last round. Previously we had a different rating threshold. At the core of emotional DNA, we ask people to choose from 36 different descriptors as a means of describing shows that they watch. No more than 10 shows. So they can use 2 words, 10 words, 12 words, 22 words, whichever they feel appropriate from this list of 36. Then we conduct a detailed factor analysis on the basis of which words are more or less present. And that enables us to place those words on each of those shows on each of 8 different dimensions of emotional DNA, of the tonality of television. And those 8 dimensions were arrived at as a finding, the first finding really, from the statistical analysis, because we found that consistently across genres and when looking at networks, we break down to have 8 statistically distinct dimensions of emotional DNA.